The Great Depression is said to have lasted from 1929 to 1941, though some also say its true end was at the end of World War II. It is seen as the greatest financial catastrophe of the entire 20th century, the only event even approaching its disastrous nature being the Great Recession of the late 2000s. How could such a monumental collapse of the economy occur? It began after the stock market crash of October 1929, which sent Wall Street into a panic and wiped out millions of investors. Over the next several years, consumer spending and investment dropped. This consequently led to steep declines in industrial output and employment as failing companies laid off workers. When the Great Depression reached its lowest point by 1933, some 15 million Americans were unemployed and nearly half the country's banks had failed. So what caused the Great Depression? As a massive recession that devastated the country, and in the end the whole world, it's hard to pin down one single cause for the Great Depression. It was a number of factors all coming together leading to more than a decade of economic misery. One of the most obvious and well-known reason was the stock market crash on October the 24th of 1929, better known as Black Thursday. The market opened with the Dow Jones 11% down. Panicked investors began selling their shares in an unprecedented volume. A record 12.9 million shares were traded. That Thursday the Dow closed at 299.47. After this Black Thursday, prices rallied briefly. People thought the scare was over, but Black Thursday was only the beginning. Then came Monday. The Dow fell another 13% to 260.64 points. Further panic set in, and the next day, Black Tuesday, the market fell even further. On October 29th, some 16 million shares were traded after another wave of panic swept Wall Street. Millions of shares ended up worthless, and those investors who had bought stocks on margin with borrowed money were wiped out completely. Over $30 billion in share value was lost. Adjusted for inflation, that equals to $456 billion in 2021. And the Dow would continue to decline for 3 years in the wake of these 3 disastrous days. Confidence in the economy was shattered. Wall Street and the banks were no longer seen as reliable and many refused to put money into stocks. But how could it come to this? Was there no way to predict this catastrophe beforehand? Had one looked for the signs, it would have become clear that the market of the Roaring Twenties was unsustainable. There were several problems with the economy that many didn't see and, more importantly, many others ignored. Throughout the 1920s, the U.S. economy expanded rapidly, and the nation's total wealth more than doubled between 1920 and 1929. The stock market, centered at the New York Stock Exchange on Wall Street, was the scene of reckless speculation, where everyone from millionaires to cooks and janitors poured their life savings into stocks. Consumer debt increased, and companies overextended themselves too. Financial institutions became heavily involved in stock market speculation. In some cases, they created securities subsidiaries with their own brokers secretly selling their own stocks, what would be a clear conflict of interest today. Weak regulations had opened the way for a period of wild speculation on stock exchanges. To say it simple, people were just gambling that the stock would keep going up. Many of them bought shares on margin, generally needing just 10% of a stock's price to make a purchase, not realizing they'd be on the hook for the whole amount if the price fell. That, in turn, inflated prices, with shares selling for more money than justified by their company's actual earnings. Because of that, the stock market underwent rapid expansion, reaching its peak in August 1929. By then, production had already declined and unemployment had risen. Wages at that time were low. Consumer debt was proliferating. The agricultural sector of the economy was struggling due to drought and falling food prices, and banks had an excess of large loans that could not be liquidated. How couldn't the market crash under these kind of circumstances?